this is the final session of the NatSCA conference. So everyone just, this is all you're going to get. We're done after this, apart from the tours, but just enjoy as much as you possibly can. We've got 3 brilliant talks for the end of the day. And my name is Jen. If you didn't already know, I've already told you. So I work in the National Museum in Wales in Cardiff. So the first talk of the day, I think maybe has the longest title ever. So this is Louise Berridge from the NHM in London, and the title is Woman of the Riverflies, Researching Underrepresented Female Naturalists and Collectors in the NHMUK's Ephemeroptera, Plecoptera and Trichoptera collections, enriching party data in the museum's collection management system and increasing women's public profiles by creating Wikipedia biographies.
Oh, hello. Thank you very much for inviting me. This presentation is about rediscovering some of the Natural History Museum's female entomologists through our Riverfly digitisation project. One of the positive impacts of our digitisation has been able to gather data and spot historical biases in our collection and to bring forward some stories about our lesser-known collectors. So I wanted to give a little bit of background about the project that spurred off this women project. The Riverflies at the Natural History Museum are curated by Dr. Ben Price, and we digitized them. We photographed them for their label data. About 74,000 specimens went through our 6-camera setup, Alice. This is our lovely Alice here. And a further 3,000 specimens were photographed through our more traditional pinned insect workflow, just to make sure that we could capture all the data because those were the type specimens. In total, we digitized about 77,000 insects. And then we undertook full label transcription. This was done by the whole digitisation team, and it was a collaborative effort because you can imagine there's a lot of spidery, strange handwriting in there. The reason for wanting the detail is that riverflies are bioindicator species. They need unpolluted water for their life cycle. They don't like things like microplastics and heavy metals in water. So their presence can help you to infer historical environmental data, which is very useful for long-form environmental studies. And we can also provide species occurrence data for the people who are trying to assess the conservation status of these insects. So here's an example of the suite of 6 pictures you can get from Alice, and it's possible to transcribe the labels in situ from these. This specimen was collected by 2 women. Patricia Lupton and Ursula Wykes were students at Lady Margaret Hall at Oxford in the 1930s, and they collected this caddisfly in 1935 on a women's expedition to Iceland in the glamorous location of a bog. And they were actually in Iceland to study mice parasites. I was able to find their co-authored paper on JSTOR to find out what they were doing in Iceland. So they just picked up this specimen incidentally. I was also able to find out a little bit more about what happened to them after university. Patricia married a banker named Kenneth Ashby and retired from the world of zoology. But Ursula, she became an ornithologist and writer, and she ended up spending a decade in the Shetland Islands with her husband Llewellyn, observing bird migration habits. So why are there so few women in this collection? We noticed the rarity of female collectors on the Riverfly labels. And I tried to think, how can we work out how many women are in here? Just looking for feminine honorifics on the labels didn't actually manage to find all the women because the space on the labels is so limited. Many labels only have initials or surname to save space. Also, we have a situation where some women are referred to just by their husband's name. For instance, we have a collector called Mrs. F. Jowett, but she's actually Mrs. Frederick Jowett, and her name is Margaret. Her given name is Margaret. So you have several layers of identity going on, and you have to try and work out all of them to help disambiguate her. So of approximately 1,000 people in this data set, 51 of them are women, which is only 5% of the total collectors. And of the 77,000 specimens in the dataset, only about 1,330 were collected or co-collected by women. And I want to shout out Evelyn Cheeseman, who's one of our better-known entomologists, because she collected 816 of them. So just one person collected more than half of the women's specimens. Why is this a particularly masculine collection? So I have some crackpot theories. The, the collectors who contributed the most to this collection, Robert McLachlan, Alfred Eaton, and Martin Moseley, are all hobby anglers. So they're spending a great deal of time on the water anyway. So they're collecting, they're doing their angling, they're just doing a lot on the river. The other male collectors tend to hold jobs that are conducive to collecting. So they're government entomologists, forestry officers, medical doctors, tea plantation owner, missionaries. Some of these jobs weren't available to women in the past. Also, the issue of social propriety. Now, Alfred Eaton is described by Robert McLachlan as stripping off in the 1870s, going into rivers in presumably his skivvies, wading around in the water to collect specimens. And this was in the context of my friend is a very strange person. But can you imagine a Victorian woman doing that? And the answer is probably not. I mean, about 70 years after Eton, Evelyn Cheeseman was criticised for wearing trousers to collect in the field. She was actually shunned by some Catholic missionary nuns she met in Papua New Guinea because she was wearing trousers. And then one day they gifted her a loaf of bread wrapped up in paper, and she thought, oh, they've warmed to me. And it turned out it was wrapped up in a newspaper with an article by the then Pope talking about the evils of women wearing masculine clothing. And she's like, oh, I mean, that's very passive aggressive. But it takes a lot of strength of character to kind of push against the tide of what's the social norms of the time. And the other thing is probably an education barrier, because for any of the women born before 1900, the chances of them accessing further education probably would have been quite limited. So here's a case study of what you can learn if you try and disambiguate a woman. This specimen is actually collected by the earliest born woman in the data set. Her name is Mary Ellen Cusack, and she was born in Swan River Colony, Australia in 1833. Her parents were colonists in what was now Perth, but they returned to the UK quite quickly because her mum was homesick. Unfortunately, Mary was then orphaned, and at 19, she got married, had 5 small children, and then got widowed at 31. So really difficult life. Her husband also probably left her in debt based on newspaper adverts I found advertising for his creditors. So not an easy life, but she obviously made quite good with her kids because one of them managed to train up to become a medical doctor, Reginald, but he had asthma. So he goes out to Colorado in Custer County because the climate there was supposed to be exceptionally good for people with lung problems. And we know that Mary joined her son out there in about 1887. And we know about Mary's life in Colorado thanks to Theodore Cockrell, who's a much more famous entomologist than she is. But he wrote home about her. He was out in Colorado because he had tuberculosis, and he befriended Mary. He made friends with her, and then they went out collecting plants and insects together. So that's nice. And his letters home detail their lives together. She was apparently one of his favorite neighbors because he could have a great intelligent conversation with her. So thanks to knowing her biography, we can actually give a year for this specimen between 1887 and 1891, so we can narrow down the data quite a bit. And we can also georeference it because Mary's house, the Cusack Ranch, is still in existence. It's now called the Pines Ranch. And I think you'd have to georeference it based on how far you think Mary and Theodore might have gone from the house to collect. But the state of Colorado is 100,000 square miles. So you could probably limit it to more like 10 or 20 square miles if you think they were really energetic. So we can get a more precise reference for this specimen through researching her. So she didn't already have an entry on our collections management system in the museum. So I made one. And I put the information that I thought would be most helpful for curators and researchers working at the museum. So her birth dates and her death dates, because that helps to make it unique, where she was born, where she died, her time in Colorado, because that seems to have been when she was active as a collector, her friendship with Cockrell, because they seem to be very intertwined as people, her maiden name, though I doubt she was collecting before marriage, you never know. And this information, I hope, will be helpful to our NHM community in terms of anyone working with our collection. If they find another Mary Cusack specimen, can go, I can match this up. I know this is her, and attribute the specimen. But that's only helpful for people within our own museum. And I thought it might be more helpful to get the information out into the public eye. So I made her a Wikipedia page. Now, her actual main collection is a botanical herbarium, which I know is at Kew. She's also got some specimens at the Field Museum in Chicago, and possibly in Theodore Cockrell's collection at the University of Colorado Boulder. So hopefully, if anyone in the future at any institution is researching her, they'll be able to find her through this wiki. So it's got very similar information to what is on the collections management system, except I was able to go into more detail. It's told us more of a narrative. And also I was able to put all the resources that I used to find the information. So Cockro's papers on Biodiversity Heritage Library in JSTOR, where he talks about her census returns with her sort of bare bones biographical data, digitized museum catalogues showing some of the things that she's got out in the world. Wikipedia entries usually appear as the first thing on a Google search or other browser searches, so it's a great way to be visible. These days also they're skimmed by AI, so if you put something inaccurate in a Wikipedia page, it's going to get around everywhere, hence putting the references so other people can follow the trail and see why I've said what I've said. But now it's out in the world. It doesn't belong to me, so this is accessible and can be edited or enhanced by anybody if they find out more information about Mary that they'd like to add. And just to put a face to the name, this is Mary at the wedding of her son, Reginald the Doctor. Apparently, she wasn't so sure about this lady Gertrude her son was marrying, but she warmed up to her eventually. So I'm going to move on and talk about another resource I've used to identify some of these women. Our institutional archive. Now, this is a collector called Miss Ricardo, and I can't actually take credit for identifying her really, because the historian Mary Crease, who wrote the Ladies of the Laboratory book series, she actually first identified a lady called Ellen Gertrude Ricardo, who is an aristocrat who lived at Gatcombe Park. So this house, Gatcombe Park, which might have been the right house, is now Princess Anne's house, to put this into some kind of social context. But Mary Crease said, I can't quite prove the connection. So she'd had to kind of leave it in a footnote. So I thought, well, can I prove it? And I managed to find out in our institutional archive, we have 2 letters from Gertrude, and they give her home address. And you can actually match it up to the census return information and find out that the aristocrat Gertrude is our dictarist, which is good because at that time no one knew. But her family is full of people called Ellen and Gertrude. So without the information in our archive, I never would have been able to sort it out. And she became an inspector of nuisance in the 1890s. That's how she probably became interested in flies. It was a sort of early health inspector role. And you had to go around looking for people who were selling rotten food, or people who had dumped illegal rubbish, or families who hadn't been able to afford to have a burial for a relative and who'd left the body hanging around. She'd go and chivvy them along. So that's how she became interested in flies, probably. She worked at our museum for 27 years and she named at least 618 Diptera species from our collection. And archive references can be used for Wikipedia, even if they're not online, provided you give a shelf reference, because other people can follow them. So she does now have a Wikipedia page. Here's an example of something wonderful I found in another archive. This is a clipping from Oxford University Museum of Natural History's archive of 2 more NHM women. This is Daphne Overton and Ethelwyn Trewavas, and in the summer of 1932, they travelled to the Tatra Mountains together, and they spent 6 weeks collecting insects for the NHM. 8,000 insects, of which 32 are riverflies. Now, Ethelwyn Trewavas already had a Wikipedia page before the project began, but Daphne Overton did not. In fact, she was a Wikipedia woman in red, which is the project Wikipedia have for women who have publications and seem to be significant scientists, but don't have any coverage. So I wondered what had happened to Daphne to make her less visible. And the answer is she got married. Up until 1946, the government and civil service had a marriage bar for women. And you can see the parallel careers of Daphne and Ethelwyn here. They're both academically brilliant. Their achievements were reported in their local papers when they qualified for university. Ethelwyn passed her university exams at age 15, like very, very, very clever. Daphne married a man named Mark Dyneley in 1935, and she was obliged to give up her job at the museum. She actually cut off so completely that she was halfway through a monograph on Calliphoridae, the fly family, and she had to hand it over to her successor, John Smart. To be fair to John Smart, he didn't try and take credit. He just proofread it and published it under Daphne's name. So John did the bare minimum and was a decent person. That's good. But afterwards, Daphne kind of disappears from the historical record, except via being referred to via her husband's name. Whereas Ethelwyn, I don't know a lot about her personal life, but she carried on working at the museum and she progressed slowly, and she mentored a lot of younger staff, including the next generation of women who worked at the museum. So these women had to choose between having a career and having a family, and you can see progress in our collection. Things are a bit better now. So here's a little note about Wikipedia notability. If you're trying to get a woman on Wikipedia and she doesn't have a lot of scientific publications, it can be really helpful to look outside and see what else she might have been doing. So this is a lady called Vera. Viralamini, she doesn't have a lot of scientific publications. She's not a prolific collector, but she was one of the earliest women to join the Royal Geographical Society. She did experiments at the Society for Psychical Research investigating telepathy in the early 1900s, which is quite out there, but notable. And she's also a published poet with her sister. So although she didn't manage to have a lot of scientific publications, she is notable enough for a wiki, so people can still find her. These are the outcomes from the project. So when I started off, 9 women had a Wikipedia page, the people who are in green, and I've managed to add the people in pink, so another 16 people. So now 25 people have a wiki. That's about half of the women in the project. The people in blue, I was able to enhance if I needed it on our collections management system. I'm a bit more leery about putting them on Wikipedia because some of them are alive, which is great, but you don't really want to put public information out without people's consent. The yellow people, all I know about them is what's on their labels. I haven't been able to disambiguate them yet. They're mysteries, which I would like to solve. The lady in black, Agnes Freeland, I desperately wanted to make her a wiki, but she's married to a much more famous entomologist, Kenneth Morton, and she's referred to in his papers as my wife, in terms of my wife is collecting with me, doesn't have her own publication, so I couldn't get her a wiki at the moment, but I'm working on it. So this is the lessons learned from the project. It's worthwhile in terms of engagement from stakeholders at the museum. A lot of people are interested in the pioneer women in STEM, and I think it's great to get the stories out there because then you can encourage the next generation, particularly the project Wiki Project Red Women. 4 of the women that I managed to make page for were in that project. So I know a lot of people are interested. It's a big undertaking solo. It would end itself well to group work. Resources finite. I'd like to do it more directed next time. And we have a lot of native collectors and indigenous and sort of unsung local collectors who would be a great next project. So thank you very much. This QR code will take you hopefully to my Google Drive, which has a list of the resources I used. I can't claim to be a disambiguation expert, but maybe would help. And if anyone would like to talk to me about it, or, you know, I can talk to you about those yellow women I can't solve, I'd be really pleased to do so. Thank you very much.
Any questions from anybody in the room? I have one. What are your top tips for finding unrecognized women on or off Wikipedia?
Well, the way I found most of these at start is I will go on Google Books and look just in a period specific search for the woman's surname to see if she's got any mentions in any literature at all. And if the answer is no, then I would go to newspaper websites to see if there's any mention of her collecting or traveling. If I can find out if she got married, which I usually use FreeBMD for, then sometimes I'll look for her under her husband's name as well. And you have to imagine the conventions of the day. A lot of women are referred to via Mrs. John Smith rather than themselves. So you have thinking back into the social manners of the time can be really helpful for finding historical women. It's not always easy. Some of these people I've not been able to find anything about.
You're doing brilliant work. It's amazing.
Yeah. If there.
I was wondering how you found the women collectors to begin with. Like, did you have a database where you kind of knew what names to look for or something to search up?
No, well, I have. I mean, it's really the collaborative effort of all the digitizers. There are about 10 of us transcribing these 77,000. I copied out our list of transcriptions and I just removed all the duplicates. And I've actually tried to identify everybody. So I have a list of about 800 men as well. I'm not going to, that will be really useful. It's just in terms of trying to do wiki pages, I wanted to concentrate on women just because there's so few of them, partly because it's a discrete project, but there wasn't really a quick fix. I mean, looking just for Miss or Ms or Madame, it wasn't enough. Particularly some women like Evelyn Cheeseman, she's just appears as L.E. Cheeseman. She didn't like her first name, Lucy, but without knowing she's a woman, you had to actually look them up. There wasn't like a quick way, unfortunately. But I have generated a lot of other useful data for our museum, hopefully.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Another round of applause. Fabulous.